speaker is Dr. Forbes Walker. As the UT Extension Environmental Specialist, his work is focused on agricultural best management practices that optimize production without negatively impacting the environment, including no-till systems for organic production, manure and nutrient management, and watershed management. Dr. Forbes, glad to have you with us.
Thank you. So, those of you who don't know me, I'm not from around here. I grew up in Scotland. I came to academia a little bit different from some of the other reformed academics we've had speaking. Alan Williams and Jim they claim to be reformed academics. I guess I came to academia a different way. I'm a soil scientist. My PhD is in soil science, but I got degrees in botany, degrees in seed technology. I spent 10 years working in Africa with subsistence farmers on low input systems. So I'm very, very comfortable with working without using herbicides, without using fertilizers, and working with what you've got. So I've, the last few years, I guess I've been taking the lead in this regenerative ag space at the University of Tennessee. A bunch of our administrators a few years ago said, "What is this regenerative ag stuff?" And the Farm Bureau had asked them, and I go, well, a lot of people think it's just this rebranding of other things. You know, we've heard of different terms. And so I'm going to go through some of the terminology that's out there in the blogosphere, out there in the YouTube world, and try and make some sense of what is going on in regenerative ag. Then talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we're doing here at the University of Tennessee. As with many of the land grants, we've heard from Alan talking about how this is the way we grow monoculture fescue. We're still battling that with some of our traditionally trained scientists in the animal science world. But there are a few of us that have actually got an open mind and actually trying to do something different. So let's see what slides I brought with me today. So this is what my presentation is going to be talk a little bit about what regenerative ag is, talk about some of the definitions that are out there, and then some of what we've been hearing the last few years about regenerative ag in the media. A lot of this is driven by the corporate world. You know, we all sat home during COVID. I think the corporate sustainability offices all sat down and said, yeah, let's say we're going to do regenerative ag. So there's a lot of noise out there about regenerative ag. And then we'll talk about a lot of the stuff that we're doing in Tennessee and have been doing for a very, very long time. In many respects, I'm getting to the stage where I'm about to say Tennessee is the regenerative ag capital of the world. Basically because we have got so much no-till and reduced tillage systems is the cornerstone of a lot of these practices. And then we're going to finally talk about some of the other things that we've got going. I've got a recent study that we just conducted here at the station, get some data for you there. So lots of buzzwords on agriculture. And this I just did, like we all do, I kind of Googled it, and there's lots of things out there, you know, agriculture, alternative agriculture, biodynamic agriculture, biointensive agriculture, biological, organic, natural, you name it all. And there's sustainable, conservation, regenerative, and climate smart. A lot of my peers at the different universities are saying we're just rebranding what we've been talking about forever. We've always been talking about sustainable stuff, but it's not actually just rebranding. So as we've got lots of buzzwords, we've also got lots of definitions, but there is starting to emerge a kind of standard-ish type definition of regenerative ag. A lot of the practices we're talking about with all these different forms of agriculture, the sustainable, the conservation, the regenerative, the climate smart, are basically the same kind of practices. And I think in the coming years, those of you who are practicing regenerative ag, I think there's some potential to get premium on some of your products in the marketplace. There's also this emerging carbon markets that I think this is the time for the carbon market related to the climate change emphasis that we're seeing now. So I think there's a lot of things to keep an eye on in the future. So I just randomly went into some of the databases we've got on recent literature out there. This is a paper that just came out in 2020. I think it came out from Holland. Regenerative ag, soil is the base. So as a soil scientist, of course, yes, the soil is the foundation of everything. I'm I came to soil science. It took me like 10 years to figure out you can have the best genetics in the world, you can have the best this, but if you've got poor soils and you don't know how to manage them, it's really kind of challenging. But these are all some of the things that the regenerative system is trying to reduce environmental externalities, improve the ecosystem. So soil health is critical to it, improving the soil diversity, improving soil carbon, soil physical quality, minimizing tillage, crop rotations. We've heard all these definitions from many of the speakers that we've already had today. This is a kind of a paper I like to cite. This is again from 2000. So that previous paper was from 2020. 20 years previously, this is a paper written by a couple of guys from the United States Department of Agriculture where they were talking about soil health. It's one of the first times that soil health was actually mentioned in the literature. And these are some of the things that we do to increase soil health. So if we can minimize soil erosion through conservation tillage, protective covers, we're going to improve our soil health. We've got lots of data to support that. We're going to conserve and build up soil organic matter. In our soils in the humid southeast, organic matter is critical. It's the driver of many of the processes, many of the microbial processes that we're trying to encourage. Balancing production, obviously synchronizing the nutrients that we're using, and using better uses of natural resources. So this is what the USDA the basis of some of the USDA things. And USDA for the last 10 years has had the big soil health kick where they've been promoting these types of practices. Let's look at regenerative ag. So I'm going to use our friends from the Regenerative Agriculture Alliance. This is Mike's group, is what they put up there. Minimizing soil disturbance, maintaining a living root system, keeping the soil covered, integrating animals, and then plant diverse crops. So that's their definition. Next one, I went to the Understanding Ag. So this is Alan Williams' group. They've added 6th principle, which is basically know your context. So basically, what I do on my farm here in Tennessee, regenerative ag might not necessarily be what we're doing in North Dakota or what we're doing down in Florida, but we're following the same principles. And you can see the same principles are, minimizing disturbance, keeping the soil covered, diverse crops and things, keeping a living root system, and integrating livestock systems. And so integration of livestock's a bit of a kind of fuzzy things that we actually got animals on the field, grazing our cover crops, or are we just using animal manures as a substitute for artificial fertilizers? So that's the Understanding Ag principles. This is a definition that General Mills came up with. General Mills was one of the first corporations to actually mention this, and I guess if you're the first to mention regenerative ag, you can come up with a definition. But you see the same kind of definition that the Understanding Ag folks are using and others. So these practices pretty much are what of them is now starting to become mainstream when we're talking about regenerative ag. And I'll talk later. I do a lot of work with row crops, but I'm going to be focusing a little bit on some of the pasture stuff we've been doing. But I'm getting to the stage where I think a lot of our row crop agriculture in Tennessee, we could claim to be regenerative ag. We're pretty much 90% no-till. We're always in a crop rotation, corn, soybeans, wheat rotations. We're keeping the soil permanently covered either with crop residues or with cover crops. And yeah, a lot of people are using poultry litter as a commonly used fertilizer source for many people. This is a University of Missouri. University of Missouri last year put up a regenerative ag website, and you can see some of the bullet points that they've got here. They've got little sections on cover crops, on grazing systems, on buffer strips, pollinators, biodiversity, a lot of these same practices. But this is the University of Missouri. There's only a handful of the land-grant universities that actually embraced regenerative ag. University of Illinois is one, Missouri is one, and Tennessee, we're starting to do it. There's a few of us that are actually starting to take this seriously and look at this because it's based on a lot of sound biological and ecological principles. Let's go back to when this term was first used. This is a new old term, I will say. This was first mentioned by the Rodale Institute in the 1980s. The Rodale Institute is primarily an organic organization. They're based out of New Jersey, and they were talking about regenerative organic agriculture. and we're going beyond sustainable to improve the soil. So the real emphasis here on how do we improve the soil. Some of the practices emphasizing this closed loop. So we're recycling within the farm, on the farm. And they came up with these 7 tendencies of regenerative agriculture. They've come up with a number of white papers in recent years. One in 2014, one more recently in 2020. In these white papers, they're claiming if we all went and started some of these practices, we're going to sequester a whole lot more carbon, and we could potentially offset some of the carbon emissions that humans are responsible for in the future. I also like to talk in the grazing systems, the work of Alan Savory. Alan Savory, originally from Zimbabwe. He's actually a wildlife guy, and he started work in the 1950s and 60s, and his big thing was that overstocking led to overgrazing and desertification. Basically, the way we were grazing our animals wasn't mimicking nature. He's since moved to the US. He's got a center now in, I think it's in New Mexico, the Center for Holistic Management. He's quite well known in the speaking circuits. If you want to Google him, he's got a TED talk that's, I think the last time I looked at, was several million views. Their organization has also got a verification program, which they started last year, basically to link people that are doing this type of agriculture with the customer base. So Alan Savory is a kind of one of the earlier thinkers in this particular area. I'll throw up another recent paper, which basically, this is folks out of Holland, where they're looking at where this term regenerative ag comes. And you can see early on in the mid-80s, it was all the noise was coming from the Rodale Institute. They were talking about it. Then it kind of got quiet. You can see the bars got quiet. And then now, in the last few years, we've heard a lot of talk about regenerative ag from organizations like the Nature Conservancy, World Wildlife Federation, Greenpeace, and then the corporate world, Danone, General Mills, and Kellogg's, and things like that. So let's see how industry has started. So this, in the corporate world, it's Danone. It's a French dairy products company. First mentioned it, talked about regenerative ag back in 2017. And what they basically said, by 2025, all their products in France are going to be produced under regenerative agriculture. General Mills was the first U.S. company to make a statement about regenerative ag. They made a statement back in March of 2019, and they said by the end of the decade, 2030, they're going to be sourcing product from 1 million acres of farmland. McCain Foods, they're primarily a kind of potato company. They got into the game and said 100% of its potato acreage by June of by the end of 2030. I don't know about you. I'm not sure how you do minimum soil disturbance and grow potatoes, but that's to be seen. I've actually seen that Oregon State have just received some funding to actually do climate-smart potato production. So that will be interesting to see. I'm from Scotland. We grow a lot of potatoes there. I know how much disturbance we do when we grow potatoes. That's my aside there. Don't tell anyone I said. But so Cargill didn't want to be outdone by General Mills. They said, okay, it's like a poker game. This General Mills said 1 million, and Cargill says I'll raise you to 10 million. So 10 million acres. That was the announcement back in 2020. And then the big guys got into it. So Walmart said, yeah, we're going to source product from 50 million acres and 1 million square miles of ocean. So they're talking about driving the adoption of regenerative ag practices. PepsiCo has mentioned 7 million acres. So you can see all these corporate folks are coming up with these very, very bold statements, and we're kind of left scratching our heads as how are we going to achieve all of this? And now we're starting to think, okay, let's start really taking this serious. The industry, and this is the livestock sector, they were a little bit later to the game. Started off with the U.S. dairy, carbon neutral by 2050. I know the livestock center, especially the beef guys, get a lot of bad press about the greenhouse gas emissions. You've got these very large animals. My argument is these animals are not in isolation. This one cow is not on a concrete floor in a barn. It's actually living on several acres, and it depends where you are. So we've got that land base to work with to try and mitigate some of the carbon dioxide that the cows are emitting, some of the methane the cows are emitting to that. So you can see JBS Foods, number one in beef and poultry globally, a very large organization. They said in zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. When we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, we're talking about three mainly for agriculture: carbon dioxide, methane. I hear you say methane. I say tomato, so it's going to be methane to me. And the final one is nitrous oxide. Anywhere we put nitrogen fertilizers out, we're going to see some nitrous oxide go up into the atmosphere. There are things that we can do to reduce that, and that's some of the things we'll be working on. So just like the General Mills Cargill battle, you know, JBS Foods comes up with a statement a couple of months later. Tyson Foods. We think of Tyson Foods here in Tennessee mainly as a poultry company, but it's a very large beef and pork supplier as well. And then lastly, the Cattlemen's Association, they had a meeting in August 2021. That was in Nashville. They came up with their carbon neutrality goal of 2040. So everyone's basically come to the table and said, we're going to do this. Now the challenge is, can we meet these goals? And I really strongly believe that we can meet these goals. And that's where we're working on. So let's take a couple of steps back. So this is a picture that I got from the Tennessee archives of how bad things were. You can see that picture on the left. It's an eroded farm near Milan, Tennessee. So that's West Tennessee, taken in 1938. You can see these erosion rates. This is what happens after 150 years of inappropriate technologies being brought over from Europe. And you've obviously, how terrible that is. You can see the bottom thing, the amount of silt in that particular river near Jackson, again in West Tennessee. And then you see the old mule and the plow in Monroe County here in East Tennessee. So this is how bad it got. We had to do something different. The big thing was, when we started this whole thing, it was really just to control erosion. We had to find ways of controlling erosion that we could still continue doing our intensive cropping systems. So really, we had to find a way of how do we control erosion without involving a whole lot of expense and also improve other environmental qualities. So what we've got in Tennessee is now this no-till system. We've been working on this since the 70s. And this is just a classic kind of thing what we do. We plant a winter wheat cover crop. We'll terminate it in the spring, a no-till, so we are disturbing a minimum amount of soil. And then you can see the corn crop coming up through the residue there. So, you know, we got the minimum soil disturbance, we got the permanent soil cover, we got the crop rotations. We've got, to my mind, that's pretty much, you know, regenerative ag. In terms of adoption of no-till, this is one of the stories in Tennessee that we've been very bad at sharing with the world. I do a lot of international work, and this is a publication that came out a few years ago, a survey of adoption. You can see we are at over 75% adoption. We're actually at over 90% adoption, I would say, and we've got this cover crop adoption 10 to 15%. We've still got a way to go there. A few years ago, I was at a conference, and Al Gore hosted a conference on his Caney Fork farm in Middle Tennessee with 300 of his closest friends. He brought in a bunch of people from California to tell us how to do no-till. I mentioned to Al Gore that we were the leaders in no-till. California, you can see their definition of no-till is they drive across the field 15 times instead of 25 times a season. And to his credit, he did say, get me a slide, and this is a slide I got him, and we talked about it. He had no idea that we were the leader, the global leader in no-till adoption. And this is just a publication showing how we came about adopting no-till. A lot of work, a lot of collaborative work with some farmers who said we've got to do something different. We've got to change a mindset. I think this is where we are at the moment with regenerative ag. It's where we were with no-till in the 70s. Some farmers said we can't keep on doing this. We've got to change. And this is, I think, where we are here with regenerative ag. This is a report from 2018 saying that 85% of the soybeans are no-till. cotton is 80%, and the corn is 76%. As a soil scientist, been working here for the last 25 years. We've been doing a lot of work with this, but it's not just in isolation. We work very closely with farmers. We work very closely with extension people, very closely with our friends at NRCS and the United States Department of Ag. We have these big field days. We just had our big field day in West Tennessee at the end of July. It wasn't as big as it was in previous years, but the highest attendance was 11,000 back in 1995. I can travel around the world and people say, oh yeah, I've been to the Milan no-till field day. We know what you guys are doing. And talk about YouTube, everyone knows what we've been doing and they kind of know us. We were doing some work a few years ago in Lesotho in southern Africa. All the commercial farmers in South Africa heard we were in town and they tracked us down and basically made us go to their farms to tell us what we were doing okay. And we had some amazing groups of farmers. We maybe had 30 farmers round the table, but these are really large farmers, and the amount of acreage that they were controlling was quite phenomenal. But they were getting no assistance, and some of the things that they were being told that they couldn't do, for example, in South Africa, the conventional wisdom, this was 15 years ago, was we can't grow cover crops, we just don't have the soil moisture. And we said, you've got to do cover crops. Now, I follow these guys on Facebook, and they're all about cover crops and soil health. So they've gone full circle. So it takes some time to change the mindset of what you can and cannot do. This is a classic example from the early days of no-till. This is in Milan, in our research station. On the left, we've got cotton. On the left, we've got cotton in a no-till situation. On the right, we've got cotton in a conventional till system, and you can see the clear water coming off the no-till versus the muddy water coming off the conventionally tilled. We've had a lot of dry weather in West Tennessee this year. They had almost 60 days of no rain in West Tennessee. Then they had a 6-inch rain event in 30 minutes at Milan. This was a month or so back. And the photographs I saw were amazing, how much flooding there was. But all that water that was coming off was clear, and it's pretty amazing. The residue stayed on, so this system works pretty well. It's kind of 6 inches in 30 minutes. We're going to see more and more of these types of weather events, extreme weather events in the future. Just to show you how much erosion we are reducing with some of these things, this is a tool that the United States Department of Agriculture used, the Russell, or the Revised Universal Soil Loss Equation. Basically, the factors of there's some things in this thing. This RLSKCP is all the. So R is the rainfall factor. It's the amount and the intensity of the rainfall we put into that equation. L and S is the length and the angle of the slope. So there's not a whole lot we can do to change that either. K is the erosivity factor. How erosive is the soil? So if your soil is erosive, there's not a whole lot you can do to change it. The one thing we can do is that C factor, which is the cover. We can keep that soil covered. If we've got bare soil, we've got lots of erosion. And you can see some of the examples of running the soil erosion rates from a typical soil in West Tennessee. If we've got corn in this particular soil, and we're plowing it, we're going to lose 64 tons of soil per acre per year. Multiply that by 100, 150 years of doing that. That's a lot of soil. If we convert to no-till, we're going to reduce that from 64 tons to 1.4 tons. So dramatic reductions in soil erosion. Can we do better? Yes, we can put a cover crop behind that, and we get to under 1 ton of soil loss per acre per year. Corn is we call that a heavy residue system. These soybeans and cotton, we don't have as much residue left on the soil surface. Hence, we've got more potential for erosion. You can see soybeans under a plow, 95 tons of soil loss an acre, cotton, 100 tons of soil loss per acre. Converting to no-till, still some dramatic reductions, still not as good as the corn, but with the no-till in combination with the cover crops, we can get under 5 tons of soil loss from 100 tons. So dramatic improvements in soil erosion. While I'm talking about this is one of the cornerstones of a lot of the practices we're talking about. And if we can keep the soil in place, we can start to improve the soil, start to build up the soil carbon, start to improve the soil structure, include the microbial activity, include the biology. This is why I'm mentioning some of these things. Other thing about no-till is because you're using less energy, you're not plowing, disking, harrowing multiple trips across the field with multiple pieces of equipment, with big tractors and heavy equipment. It's actually, you can plant a crop much cheaper than you can under conventional means. And this is just some of the examples from our 2022 budgets. Return on expenses for no-till corn in this example is about $114 an acre compared with $92 for the tillage. And it's because of the reduction. We're getting the same yields initially and then ultimately better yields with no-till. And we see increases in soil carbon, improved aggregate stability, which is great for infiltration rates. And we do see changes in the soil biology and microbial biomass. We've also documented, and again, this is no-till systems. We're going to be moving on to pasture systems soon. Great benefits from adding cover crops by increasing the amount of carbon, both the total and the dissolved organic. These different carbon forms are really important because carbon is a major thing that microbes need. If I'm a microbe, I need carbon and I need nitrogen in order to multiply and do well. So that's why carbon is really important. We see increased wet aggregate stability. This is a fancy term to say these soil clods are going to hold up under rainfall, and they also provide a good way for infiltration. If we've got leguminous cover crops, things like vetch or clovers, we're going to see more nitrogen in the system. We're going to see better infiltration and soil moisture in the till systems and in no-till cotton. Weed suppression is a really, really big thing these days. I've forever been fighting with our economists to say, the use of cover crops is not just because of the nitrogen value, it also cuts out a bunch of herbicide use. And we're seeing that people are cutting out a lot of herbicide applications through the use of cover crops. We've finally got our weed scientists to no longer just think about using a jug of chemicals to control the weeds, but actually to use cover crops. And they're finding that the cover crop system is with the weed suppression is cutting out herbicide use, but it's also improving other things associated with the increasing the biology, increasing the carbon and things like that. We also see improved yields under weather extremes. If you've got better infiltration and you get a dry spell in the summertime, you've got more moisture in that soil profile, and this is where we do see some significant yield increases over systems where we don't have cover crops. So a lot of these terms of this, we use these terms interchangeably, the soil health, the regenerative ag practices. We're going to now talk a little bit about the climate smart. There's many of these same practices that are cornerstones of all these types of agriculture. So we know tillage, or the no-till cover crops and nutrient management are really important to have a good and a well-functioning soil. We know these were originally to reduce soil erosion rates, and now we're learning it's improving soil health, improving the biology of the soil, basically much better all around. We can see improvements in these physical properties. Final point is we're starting to see this as a way that we're actually building resilience. In this changing climate that we're experiencing, we're going to be seeing more droughts and more floods. And by building resilience in your soil, these soils will be able to handle the droughts because we've got more infiltration, so we've got more moisture in the profile. We're not losing all that rainfall as runoff and inundating our streams and overpowering our towns and floods and things like that. So that's how this kind of soil management helps improve against floods and droughts. And we're also going to be seeing more heat. So you saw I think it was it Alan yesterday was showing some examples of the differences in the heat. That's a real common thing if you've got if you don't have a bare soil, if you've got that soil permanently covered, you're going to dramatically reduce it. And then in the future, I think there's going to be some economic incentives coming from future carbon credits. A lot of these corporations that are coming up with these grandiose things of, by 2030 we're going to be carbon neutral by 2040. We're going to be zero greenhouse gas emissions. How are they going to get to those credits? They're going to have to buy carbon credits. And they are going to have to go to the agricultural community and say, okay, have you got credits? I was recently in Jefferson County, just outside of Knoxville, visiting with a farm who's doing a lot of this stuff with some representatives from a mining company. And this mining company is going to be starting in West Tennessee, mining titanium of all things. But they are talking the talk. I know it's an oxymoron, an environmentally friendly mining company, but that's what they're talking about. And they're actively looking for people to buy credits from. So it was kind of interesting to take them to meet this farmer. And Wynn basically said, I've sold all my credits for this year, but you can, if you're interested in buying my credits for next year. So these are types of things that you need to be thinking about as alternative revenue streams. It's going to be coming down and the line, and I think we're going to be well suited to do that. Just to say an example, so there's a project that's going to be starting soon. I'll be talking that we're working with Tyson on, and the Tyson, their beef goes, their concept is we want to be, you saw their goals for zero emissions by whenever it was, 2040. Tyson is interested they're not interested in measuring all the carbon impacts of the animals that they're buying. They want to develop a program where the beef cow that comes to their slaughter facility is carbon certified. So all the legwork has been done. The person who grew that cow has gone through all the paperwork to say, yeah, this is a carbon certified animal. And that allows someone like Tyson to put the animal through their slaughter facility and then claim to be it. So this is the way the industry is going. And we believe that either you can sell your animals to these corporations or you won't be able to. So I think it's something that we're all going to have to pay a lot more attention to. Climate smart agriculture is the new buzzword, especially in this current administration. And when we talk about climate smart agriculture, again, we're talking about managing droughts and floods and higher temperatures. And we all know about, different parts of the state, West Tennessee especially, we had long dry spells, and then we were followed by floods. Last year in Waverly, Tennessee, we had, 17 inches of rain in 6 hours, just completely devastated the whole region. So yeah, we do. In the same year, you can have a drought as well as having a flood. One of the things we want to do is build this soil resilience. So we want to develop systems where we're sequestering carbon. There are even some practices, I think, that we're going to be using. We're going to be applying some materials onto the surface of the soil that may not increase our yield, but it will increase our potential to sequester carbon. And if we get into the carbon markets, that's going to be really important. We also need to develop systems where we mitigate these greenhouse gases, so carbon dioxide. So for sequestering more carbon, we're offsetting some of the carbon dioxide. There's methane, that's more in our kind of flooded systems, rice production, that's important. We see a lot of methane production there. In our livestock systems, we do see a lot of the animals, the bovines will release a lot of methane, they belch a lot. That can be modified with diet and other things, so some of the animal scientists are working on that. The nitrous oxide, this is this gas, potent greenhouse gas that's released anywhere where we put nitrogen out. And there's ways to better manage our nitrogen fertilizer use to improve that. And then the other thing is also, finally, is water management. So now I'm going to change gears a little bit, and this is going to be few slides on some work the graduate student of mine recently came up with. So Cara Grosso, she came to us from Pennsylvania of all places, wanted to work in these. So we ended up looking at some plots that we've got about a quarter of a mile away from here. These are plots that my colleague Pat Kaiser, who's our native warm season grass guy, had thing. And we wanted to see how different grazing strategies impacted soil health parameters. So she's a soil scientist, I'm a soil scientist, so we were looking at the grazing, seeing what the grazing impacts had on the soil health and other things. So these are famous Scottish breed here, the Aberdeen Angus. You call them Black Angus here. That was the animals. This is the site, just again, a quarter of a mile from here. And these are some of the kind of tools that we use to do this particular study. So we are, as I'm sure all aware, very, very, with our common pasture species is tall fescue. It's a cool season grass. It does really well in the springtime. We're not talking about replacing tall fescue. We're talking about complementing the system with other practices. We are the center of the Bible Belt. We're also the center of the fescue belt. You can see all the surrounding states where the fescue is grown. This is the kind of concept we're working with. So typically, this is the growth curve of cool season grasses in that light green color. So you can see they do really well March, April, May. Once it gets hot, they kind of go dormant. And typically, we have a summer slump, they call it. And then once things start to cool down like it is today, then that fescue starts to wake up and becomes a little bit more active. The idea is, can we, for that summer period, can you actually put native warm season, some of your fields into native warm season grasses? And there's all sorts of benefits that these native warm season grasses have. So basically, diversify your forage base and help your animals during the summer months. I mean, it's not uncommon. I mean, I heard people were feeding hay on some of our conventionally managed farms here in Tennessee in the middle of the summer because they just ran out of forage. So there's really no excuse for running out of forage in Tennessee. I have one of the extension agents in Rutherford County. She's in animal science. She says, our grazing season is the same length as it is in Michigan, and there's no reason why our grazing season should be the same length as it is in Michigan. We've just got to change the way we do stuff and be a little bit smarter about doing that. A little bit about some of these native warm seasons. These are the prairie grasses. These are the grasses that are common in the Great Plains. Little blue stem, big blue stem, eastern gamma grass, Indian grass, switchgrass. I particularly like them because of the depth of their rooting systems. These roots can go up 14 feet. Fescue can go 2.5 feet. So when we're talking about the potential to sequester carbon, if you've got roots that go down 14 feet, you've got carbon being sequestered 14 feet. And in this new world that we're emerging in, the potential for selling carbon credits in these types of systems, I think, is quite high. So that's why I'm a big fan of these natives. They also have got a different photosynthetic pathway. For those biology nerds, we've got the C3 photosynthetic pathway and the C4. These are C4 plants. They're much more efficient at fixing, at photosynthesis, especially during the hot months. The other thing is because they're so deep-rooted, they can survive droughts much better than, and they can also, because they're so deep-rooted, you've got much better infiltration rates. A few years ago, Hurricane Harvey, I think that was 2017, after it left Houston, having dumped this much water in Houston, it came through middle Tennessee. It didn't linger over Nashville, but it kind of skirted around. I was on a farm the week after Hurricane Harvey, and they said, yeah, we had about this much rain in 24 hours. And on that farm, the fescue fields were all waterlogged. We were driving on the native warm season grass fields. The infiltration was that good. I'm a little bit of a slow learner. I should have taken a lot of pictures, but that was just incredible. That from a waterlogged part to actually driving. So these things, I think we've got a lot of potential. Another thing, I've added this slide in here, just thinking about these native warm season grasses and the great herd. So if you think about the Midwest, the very, very productive soils in the Midwest, these dark black soils. Yesterday in Alan's presentation, when he was showing the slide from Mexico where he saw that dark horizon, that is organic matter which had been developed over the millennia with having grazing animals and grasses. These types of soils, in soil science language, we classify things into 12 orders. Mollisols is what these soils are called. And you can see that map in the area. That's where all the mollisols are in the United States. These dark, productive soils formed under grasslands. But these grasslands, it's not just grasslands in isolation, it's grasslands with herbivores grazing. And they're not grazing, they're always on the move. So we're learning that these grasses co-evolved with the animals, the grazers. So these grasses actually respond and perform better if they're grazed than if they're not grazed. And this is where we're going to, this final bullet, how did the great herds graze? there's estimates of 400 to 500 species of plants in some of these grasslands, and obviously the diversity of that in terms of animal nutrition is amazing. You're learning that not all your weeds are bad, and that some of your weeds are edible, and that needs to be part of the animal's diet. They call them Forbes. That's my name, so yeah. Another thing is I also put this slide in. I'm doing a lot of searching of the literature of the other great ecosystems of the world. So I lived in Tanzania for seven years, and the Serengeti was in my backyard. And it's kind of interesting. There they have they call it the annual migration of the wildebeest and the zebra. These animals all congregate in one large herd. They drop all their young. They give birth to all their young. So the predators can only take a few of them. But this is a paper that was published in 1976 by an ecologist. And what he was saying that in 1974, there was 1 million wildebeest in this ecosystem. It's now more than that. 600,000 gazelle, 200,000 zebra. And they're all following the grass where the grass is most nutritious as the rains change. They said that in 4 days, the wildebeest reduced the biomass in this particular area by 85%. So the animals are going in, mob grazing, 85% of the biomass is gone. The height is reduced 56%, and the biomass concentration by 66%. Those people that have been talking about how we manage the height of the sward, this is the kind of things that Jim was talking about yesterday, about the optimum height. And the more you graze down, the lower the quality and the more challenging. So this is what these ecologists knew back in 1974. They also found that 28 days later, the grazed area of the production was increasing by 2.6 grams per meter squared per day. So there was an increase in production 28 days later, whereas the ungrazed actually decreased. It was actually going from its vegetative phase to its reproductive phase, so it was actually losing biomass. So what happens is the wildebeest and the zebra herds go through, and then a month later, the gazelle come through. And they were saying that where the gazelle came through 30 days later, there was 4 times more production on the previously grazed grasses than the ones that hadn't been grazed. So this is great. I've been looking at a lot of this stuff. This is from the 70s. This guy called Steve McNaughton. He was actually spent his career getting research funding for studying these systems, even though he was based in Buffalo, New York. So that's my aside. So this is where we see, okay, so this particular study, which was a quarter of a mile away, the big question is, can we continuously graze these grasses, or is there a potential for grazing them at early part of the season and resting the rest of the season, or grazing them in the middle part of the summer season or at the end of the season? So this is what we were trying to do, and see whether we could see differences in the soil health parameters. So big question is, we looked at different native warm season grasses. Was one grass better than another? And how should these be grazed? And what kind of soil health indicators change? This is a bit of a busy slide showing some of the soil health indicators. We've already heard people talk about this, but the wet aggregate stability is a real good indicator. It's a real pain to do, but that's a real good indicator. It basically says how robust is that soil, the aggregates of the soil. How do they stand up to physical abuse from water? Gravimetric water content is how much moisture is in the soil profile. I'm starting to think that as a soil health indicator, moisture in the profile after a period of dry is a great soil health indicator. We also looked at the microbial populations, looked at different forms of carbon, some of the carbon that's said to be more biologically available, as well as some other things. So this is the thing that Cara did. This is just a schematic of the area that we're talking about, and the different plots. But so this is how we managed the site. So we started by, this site had actually been established in 2018 or 2017, I believe. Last year we came in and we did some burning to get rid of some of the biomass. And then we went ahead, and these are some of the sampling protocols. We sampled before the grazing, we sampled after the grazing, as well as we had some long-term things. And lots and lots of pretty pictures of fancy equipment that we use in the lab to measure some of these weird things. And so the conclusions were, so based on the stocking rate, we did see that blue stem was a better, in terms of soil health, was better overall than the switchgrass. It's actually, the animals actually prefer eating the big blue stem than the switchgrass, so that was it. Also found that there was really no difference in the soil health under the no-rest conditions and the rotational grazing things. So this was telling us that, yeah, it doesn't really matter how we graze these things. We can graze them constantly, or we can graze them at shorter periods of time. And we found that it responded with increasing some of this organic carbon. Other trends we found that over the season, we saw that the microbial biomass declined, which is not surprising. That's very, very related to moisture conditions and things like that. We did see that the gravimetric water content increased, so that tells us that we're getting better infiltration in some of these systems. And the oxidizable carbon, which is the biologically available carbon, was increasing. And we saw that the thing varied by the slope as well as the species. Overall, we got a good initial data set to start working on to say, yeah, there is something in these grazing management, different grazing management in terms of soil health, and that will lead us to the potential for other things when we talk about the future carbon markets. Where am I at the moment? Okay. So, Regenerative Ag at UT, we mentioned that Missouri had a website. We've gone ahead and put our own website up. If you want to, it's just we just threw it up there. We haven't really spent a whole lot of time on it, but that's where we are with our website. The big thing is, yeah, it's great to have these teams together. They're going to work on regenerative ag. How are we going to get them? How are we going to get funding for this thing? The university doesn't give us funding. We've got to go out and hunt it down. And fortunately, we just hit the big time. So earlier on this year, USDA said, we want to put $1 billion into these climate-smart commodities. And so they asked for large-scale pilot projects. So Pat Kaiser and myself, Pat's the native warm season guy, sat down and we built a large team covering a number of, I think, 9 or 10 states. And anyway, last week, as of last Wednesday, it was announced that we were one of 70 projects to be funded. And it's a crazy number, $30 million. The $30 million is not going to the university. A lot of it's going out to farms to help establish some of these practices. This particular, it's a monster of a proposal that we put together. Total of 28 partners. You can see all the states that are involved. A lot of the land grants in those states are involved. We've got different corporate partners, Tyson Foods, JBS, Nature Conservancy. There's a whole host of other things. The practices that we're going to be promoting are the use of native grasses to diversify the forage base, get those grasses growing in the summer months. Regenerative grazing, we did put the term regenerative grazing in there, so we're going to be encouraging these types of practices that we've been talking about at this conference. Looking at alternative nitrogen sources, things like poultry litter and things like that. Different soil amendments. Biochar is a soil amendment from alternative energy systems. There's some work going on out there to show that, yes, you put this biochar down and you can sequester more carbon. Silver pasture is another thing we're going to be promoting, as well as grass buffers. And so we've got a lot of work to do in the next 5 years. I was kind of thinking it might be time to go leave University of Tennessee, move to the beach and drink funny cocktails. I guess I can do that in about 10 years' time. But we're also going to be doing a lot of things actually to measure the changes in the carbon dynamics. So we've got a very big budget to look at how these practices help to sequester carbon, how they help to mitigate against these other greenhouse gases, the nitrous oxide and things like that. So that's kind of exciting news for us. We're going to be probably doing a lot of that work on the monitoring here on this station here. So if I'm ever invited back to future conferences, we might be able to talk about some of that stuff with some of our grazing stuff. Some of the other things that we're got in the works, we do have a lot of work to be doing on the nitrogen management. We know developing carbon budgets for different cropping and livestock systems. We are going to be testing a tool as a tool that NRCS has developed. It's a bit like that revised universal soil loss tool where you put in your practices. We want to see if that works for Tennessee, so that's one of the things. And then, of course, there's carbon markets. It's like the Wild West out there at the moment. And where do we go? And, of course, outreach, things like this, talking to farmers, getting them to, we did it before when we got people to adopt no-till. Now we got to do it to get people to adopt some of these regenerative grazing practices. And with that, I think I'm done, Mike.
Well, okay. That's great. Anybody got any questions? I bet there's a bunch of them. Here we go. Okay. Got one here and one right there. Over there.
Dr. Forbes,
Yeah.
for the last couple of years, I've introduced sorghum Sudan and Sudan grass into a fescue-based pasture, and it's done very well. What about the gamma grass and the blue stem? Is that something that can be introduced into our system for warm system in East Tennessee?
So our concept is, at the moment, a lot of people have just cool season pastures. Yeah, 100% cool season. So our concept is, rather than just go 100% cool season, have a few of your pastures natives. Yeah. So the natives, you can't really, it takes a long time to get these things established. It takes a year or so to get these established. So you take that out of production. So the argument is, you see that slump in the summer months, that 3 or 4 month slump. So we're not saying 50%, we're saying like 20 or 30% of your fields or your acreage should be in these natives. And that will offset some of the issues we've got with the summer slump. And then the other things is the potential for all these other things that you can do in terms of sequestering carbon and then mitigating against floods and droughts. We've got some papers in the works where we've actually done some modeling on large-scale watersheds and say, okay, if all the farmers in this watershed converted 20 or 30% of their pastures from just fescue to natives with the deeper rooting and the better infiltration, what's that going to do in terms of flood mitigation stuff? And we're showing that, yes, you can dramatically, and this may be something, again, this is for the policy people, rather than spend all this money on rebuilding infrastructure and retooling bridges and building bigger culverts, could we not actually encourage farmers to do things like this and then increase infiltration rates, and we're going to avoid floods and things like that? So these are all kind of things that we're thinking about. It all depends on, politicians and policymakers and things like that. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Just have a real quick one, I think. When you did talk about the research on the native grasses and the soil improvement, how long had those been in? How many years had they been in?
They had been established in 2018. So this had been, I think one of them was 2016. So they'd been established about 6 or 7 years. And it was initially just it wasn't a part of a grazing study. Then it became a grazing study. And then we thought, well, if they're grazing it with different ways, let's have a look at the soil health parameters. So those plots are still there. And we're, with this new initiative that we just got funding with, I think our heads are all kind of spinning at the moment because obviously $30 million is quite a large amount of money. Yes?
You just mentioned biochar.
Yes?
And I just wonder what the sources for that are and if they can collect carbon credits for creating the biochar.
So biochar is those of you who don't know, I will answer your question. So biochar is the byproduct of alternative energy. So what people are doing is they're taking woody biomass and then heating it up in the absence of oxygen to generate syngases, things like hydrogen. You can take that hydrogen and put it through a fuel cell and generate energy. The byproduct is this carbon-rich material called biochar. So in the state of Tennessee, we have got the city of Lebanon has got their wastewater treatment plant has a biochar unit to help with the offset some of the energy costs from the wastewater treatment thing. So they were producing 3 or 5 tons a day of that material. We've been doing a lot of work and researching into this material. There is also in Rockwood near Lenore City, there's also another operation that's there doing that. So those are the only 2 commercial, semi-commercial sized things. But if you go to the Northwest, there's a lot of biochar, interested in biochar. I think it's the future. And I do think so. There was a study that recently came out of Iowa where they had grown some native warm season grasses. They'd put, I think it was 5 tons of biochar down. They came back 6 years later and they found out there was double the amount of carbon that they'd initially put down was in the soil. So I think it's going to be a tool that could be used by farmers in the future, not necessarily to help your productivity, but it's also going to obviously help all sorts of things in the soil, but also help you get at some of these carbon credits. So it's I'd go to a lot of biochar conferences. In the past, it was kind of, this stuff is magic, but now we're starting to understand how there's different types of biochar. I mean, for example, the temperature at which it's produced at is very important. And you can have a pH range from pH 4 biochar all the way to pH 11. And in the soil pHs like that, those kind of ranges, it affects lots and lots of things. So we're learning more and more about it. But I do think it's one of the future tools we'll have. I know USDA has just put it as one of the things that they're encouraging use of. But there's very few people producing biochar, and but I think we're going to be seeing more of it in the future.
So I guess you're maybe the best person to ask this question. Have you heard of something called the Australian method or the Australian soil planners? Is actually what their name is. You can go to their website. It doesn't tell you, at their website, they don't tell you anything about what they do. They say they're the largest sustainable group of farmers in Australia.
There are different, I mean, I know the Australians are big into this whole kind of regenerative thing as well, but I'm not particularly familiar with that group. But
Well, there's something that's going on in Mississippi. There's a lot of farmers that have gotten involved in this process, and I can't find anything about it.
let's
without
talk
being in
later, and we'll see. I can put some feelers out into my contacts in Australia to find out what's going on. But yeah.
So two questions. First one, you talked about the cover crops back with the row cropping part. So in your vast experience, what do you think realistically it will take to increase the 10 to 15% of utilization of which is very low here? And I know in other states, I travel all over the southeast U.S. at least, it's also that low or lower. And you know, the USDA has the cost share program, which is wonderful, and I know other countries don't. But what do you think it will take, since that's been very proven that it's very effective?
Again, I think it's just going to take more and more people doing it and more people adopting it. It's like in the initial stages of no-till, you don't see much of a difference in your thing. But the same thing with cover crops. That first couple of years, you may not see a whole lot of difference, but when that next drought happens or dry spell, and you've got that extra little bit of moisture in your soil profile, that's where people are starting to see it. So we are seeing some people, some of these larger guys, that they're growing large quantities of cover crops. And one of the other things that we're seeing is a lot of people are actually starting to graze these cover crops in the springtime.
Right,
And in Middle Tennessee, in Cannon County, there's a farmer we're working with, and he and his brother had 800 acres, and he said his neighbor's dairy cows, I think he saved something like $20,000 in a feed bill over the spring by just and he liked having the animals come in and graze his cover crops because it reduced the biomass he had to handle with, but also he got the manure and all the effects there. So these kind of innovative ways of using cover crops and making cover crops pay is going to be the challenge. But it's just going to take time. I'm confident, knowing the no-till story. You know, 40 years ago we were at 0%. Now we're at 90%. We can do this, guys.
Sure. Then the other thing is there any exchange yet that's created for the carbon credits, or for anybody in here that would want to sell them, or what's the communication form?
So there are some it's like the .com era, you know, when all these companies, you know, internet companies were going to make $1 million. That's where we are. So there's a bunch of folks out there that are basically grouping farmers together and saying, yeah, I've signed up, you know, X number of farmers that represent 100,000 acres. We've got this amount of carbon credits. So where they, and then they'll sell them in the open market. The farmers I spoke to said it's not really worth it because these companies are taking 80% of the money. One of the things as part of this proposal I didn't mention, we're planning to develop, or our economists are planning to develop a platform which will enable farmers to actually market their own carbon credits. A bit like the Zillow model. So I'm sure we've all gone onto Google and said, this is where I live, and Zillow says, oh, my house has increased in value by 10. So the idea here is that you put in where your farm is, and then you look at see who else in the neighborhood has sold carbon credits recently and come up with a Zillow carbon price based on the current market conditions. And then the other thing is, the farmers can then hopefully connect with people that want to buy credits. And believe me, a lot of these corporations are going to be looking to buy credits. And this is the future. When it's going to happen, I don't know. It's going to be really messy, but we're going to get there, I believe, this time.
So, Forbes, you answered part of my question right there. But is there a resource that you could point us to that would be just a good overview of understanding what farm credit means, carbon credit, what it means?
So the person that deals with this in UT Extension is our extension economist. Aaron Smith is his name. So if you can send me an email, I can connect you with Aaron, and he'd be happy. He goes around. That's one of the things that he does, a lot of talks on these things. So I'll maybe find out when he's next talking in your area, and sort of you can go listen to him.
Other questions?
I had a question. I guess it's about people that deal with buying hay, traveling around mowing, maybe would deal with T-Dot, maybe, but it's Johnson grass infiltration into our farms. Normally, you'd want to get rid of Johnson grass. Because
some of our cattle guys love Johnson grass.
Well, if it
as a summer forage.
Yeah. When it gets tall, it's poisonous to horses, so you have to cut it short. But then, so then it forces you to cut your hay quicker each year because you don't want it to materialize for horses. But would you recommend when these crop farmers come through that they clean their machinery before they come on your farm? I mean, would that be a help?
I mean, Johnson grass. I mean, you're talking to a soils guy here, so the whole hay management and the movement of hay is something that I really am not very familiar with. But but I mean, it sounds like if you are concerned about the spread of Johnson grass, yes, I'm sure the equipment will pick up some seed and it could. But I know a lot of cattle guys that love Johnson grass, and that's their go-to thing, and they actually manage it so that they don't kill it when they graze it. But there are ways of, overgrazing it and killing it. So it depends on your things. The horse thing, I'm not very familiar with horses, but I do know horses, completely different animal to cattle, and they graze in different ways and they do different things.
I guess I thought Johnson, just as a method of pinpointing something, it could be any seed, just a seed that you wouldn't want on your farm, just it being brought around by commercial farmers, just, that was just one I throwed in.
I don't know, can you make any comments on this, Mike? Yeah. Then we start to get into the regulations, and we don't like too many regulations, and sort of, it's maybe a Department of Ag thing, but I know there's all sorts of rules and regulations about moving firewood because we don't want, fire ants moved around and stuff like that, and yeah, so.
I'm not sure that I totally understood about the biochar. Can you be more specific in explaining that, where it comes from, what its benefits are, and what the potential, if there is any that you're seeing, negatives it could have on our soils if it's used over a long time?
So it's early days for biochar, okay? So I've been researching it for probably 10 years. Basically because we're producing some in Lebanon, Tennessee, and they basically said, what can we do with this stuff? So we've tried biochar in all sorts of different settings. We've tried it with nursery crops to increase the moisture holding capacity in container industry. It does a really good job there. We've applied it on fescue fields. It doesn't do anything to the yields, but it starts to build up the soil carbon. And what's happening is that biochar will move through the soil profile, and because it's a carbon-rich source, it kind of traps a lot of nutrients, it traps a lot of moisture, and so there's this little microenvironment where the microbes are starting to really benefit from. And as that moves through the profile, it's doing all. So we're just learning about these types of things. One thing I have that's been fairly successful, we put it out in flooded or formerly flooded fields in West Tennessee. So we have a flood, low parts of the field will have maybe this little amount of sand left behind. So you go from growing stuff in that part of the field to not growing. So we've been putting biochar on those parts of the field, and that's increasing the moisture holding capacity and gradually starting to see the yields build up. We've built up the organic matter, but it's a material that's out there that is getting a lot of attention, and it's basically we take woody biomass, you name it, wood chips, grass, and we heat it in the absence of oxygen, and this is really to generate hydrogen gas. That we then take that hydrogen gas, we put it through a fuel cell and generate energy. So the material that's left over after that process is this biochar stuff. And there are certain industrial uses for it, there's certain potential agricultural uses, but we're seeing that the big thing is this potential for increasing sequestration rates in our deeper rooted soils. Yeah. So.
Is this like a burn product?
I should have brought, it's just, you can imagine what wood chips look like before, they just suddenly go all black. And it's a very light material, but it's almost like a charcoal-like material. But it's not charcoal, so, yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Dr. Forbes, very much. Let's take a 5-minute break.